I don't know if I could do a fake German accent here.
You can try.
Let's see. They are eloquent of its symmetry, vitality, and delicacy of form. Directly Oh, come on. I don't even know if I sound German or French.
You do.
Anyways. What up, my fellow Nigerians?
It's Ada, your host.
And it's the scientist. You're welcome to this episode of our very beloved podcast, the 0100 Niger. This is our second episode, but our very first proper episode.
Yes.
Last week we did the introductory episode and we introduced the podcast. We spoke about the ideas behind us deciding to do the podcast. And we hope you enjoyed that episode as brief as it was.
The French segment, we hope you enjoyed it too.
Right. On this episode, however, we will be starting from the beginning.
Yes.
Right? The podcast, the title, of course, it's 0100 Niger, right? We promise we'll bringing you, telling you the what is, right? What was about this country, Nigeria.
So like he said, like the scientist said in the last podcast, for us to understand what is, we need to understand what was. We need to understand how we got here in the first place.
Exactly.
And that is what we're going to bring to you today.
Exactly. And that's why in this episode, we are going to be taking a pretty deep look at the ancient history of the place we now know as the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Right, so Ada, we've been working on this particular episode for over a week.
Yeah, for 8 days.
We were working on it before the first episode came out.
Yeah.
Right, and it's taken so much time putting together.
How difficult was it for you?
Yeah, going into it at first, you tend to overlook certain things and you tend to belittle the amount of work that will be involved in putting a work like this together, right? Many people will tend to find it hard to think of societies and communities that existed in this land, in this region, prior to colonization in the 19th century, right? Yeah, and I think, for all my good intentions and for all I might purport to know about the history of the country prior to this time, I think I fell into that trap myself.
Yeah.
And then so in working to put the show together, I got a very sharp awakening or reawakening.
Yes.
And yes, I got to discover that we have a very long and tortuous history in this country. There is a very ancient history of societies and civilizations that have existed for ages and ages in the region we now call home, Nigeria.
I would say the same thing for me because before colonialism or colonization itself, my knowledge of pre-colonization is pretty meek. I don't really know much about it until recently, especially when I discovered that Africa itself has claimed to life itself has claimed to come from Africa. There's evidence showing that all life and everything. So, and
although we won't be discussing this much in this particular episode, but there's a report. Yeah, it's not recent. It's an old one actually. About the finding. There was a finding of a skeleton in a cave in Ondo State, Nigeria, and when it was dated and found to be 8,000 years old.
Yeah, I think I've heard of. I think the one I heard of was Ekene or Soba. I don't know.
Yeah, that one was somewhere in the northeast. It was found by a headsman. Yeah, he found it east here, I think.
The far old also.
Alright, so with this little introductory discussion of ours, I think we are set to start with the episode proper.
Yes.
Alright, so please get on, put on your seatbelts as we go. It promises to be quite a ride. All right, so Ada, I think it should go without saying, right? Although we wouldn't want to be guilty of being too condescending by not saying it, it goes without saying that the history of the Nigerian people far predates the imposition of colonial rule or even contact with Europeans themselves in the 15th century.
Yeah, like we just said, I don't think we should make that mistake ever. Anyone that's listening to should not make that mistake. After you listen to what we have to say today, you should not make that mistake of thinking that before colonial rule, Nigeria as it is now is nothing.
Right. So the 19th century was a tumultuous time for much of the lands and people of the inner parts of the continent of Africa. And for the region of West Africa that is today known as Nigeria, it was indeed a time of great change and upheaval in what has been the state of affairs in the area for quite a number of centuries. There was the great expansion and conquest of much of Hausa land by the Sokoto Caliphate, headed by the Sheikh Usman Danfodio, of course, causing a cascade of changes in the region, including the final collapse of the Kwararafa states. The Kwararafa states include what is known as the Jukun tribes. Right, and we will talk about them much later on anyways. So the conquest by the Sokoto Caliphate of much of the area, of course, caused the final collapse of the Kwararafa states and the weakening of the Oyo Empire, and that this was largely due to internal strife and civil wars as a result of the slave trade, as we will discuss much later on also, but also due to the southward incursion by the Caliphate, of course. The Old Benin Empire by this time had also suffered great decline, largely due to civil war.
Civil wars, yeah.
Internal civil war that was fueled in part by the many corrupting effects of participation in the slave trade. This was also true for most of the formerly great African empires and kingdoms that fell to decay from the 17th century onward.
I think naturally that's usually the case with empires now. Internal civil war, strife.
Right, but in this case, you see.
Why we say internal civil war?
No, internal strife, right? Civil war.
Yeah.
Civil war means you have different parts
Factions.
of a civil society fighting against each other. Anyways, in this case, in the case of the empires of this region of Africa, anyways, we'll get to discuss how the slave trade was almost directly responsible for the internal strife and the wars that finally broke down the empires and the kingdoms, the great kingdoms of old. Now, the 19th century came to an end with the famed scramble for Africa, right? Beginning mid-century, right, around the 1850s and so, with its subsequent effects on the politics, economics, society, and the collective fate of the continent and its people. The result of the occurrences that culminated in the 19th century was the stagnation of the evolutionary process that is thousands of years in the making, and evolution of unique societies and cultures. Now, what processes are these that we allude to, and what societies and cultures do we refer to? Stay with us as we go on this ride together, of course.
Yeah. I think, does the scramble for Africa have a name? I know the one for the Middle East had this name. I don't think I remember.
Well, it's called the Scramble for Africa. Right. So, with the Scramble for Africa ending, well, it ended in the 19th century, right, when the European powers, of course, shared the various parts of Africa among each other. We will talk about this too later on, although this will be in the second part of this episode, coming out on Thursday, so please watch out for that.
We forgot to mention that it's going to be a two-parter episode.
Exactly, because like we said, we found out that there was so much history to include in this episode, so we couldn't possibly force everything into it. So we will be talking about the first major part, right? The prehistoric Nigeria and the societies and kingdoms that made up the region and the evolution, right, over the ages in this part here. Yeah. So for the next part, we will focus on what happened with how the British got involved in the region, beginning with the abolition of slave trade and what happened afterwards with that. That will be our focus in the second episode.
Modern history.
Alright, so anyways, with the scramble for Africa, the Europeans looked for excuses that they gave to themselves to legitimize their actions in Africa. They left their land, came over here, took over the place, became overlords. Like, you saw the name down there, the British overlords, right? So they became overlords. You have these people that have been existing as autonomous communities for centuries, millennia in certain cases, and they just came and took over their affairs, all for your own personal gain. All this you look at. So the Europeans look for any excuse to dehumanize them or to relegate these people, right, as less human than they are, right? What later happened actually was that beginning in the 20th century, there was a number of archaeological finds made in different locations of Nigeria in particular, right?
And
now,
Africa,
these finds pointed consistently to the fact that the area that was beginning to get known then as Nigeria has been settled continuously for a long time indeed, and that the peoples that occupied the region over these ages had done so in societies and communities that were civilized indeed and in possession of sophisticated arts and cultures. The Europeans making these discoveries then, they were so astounded by these discoveries they were making that they were often driven, right? They were so often driven to outlandish and even ridiculous sentiments in the attempt to explain away the presence of these rather spectacular art forms in the numbers and varieties that they have found, right? So you have people like Leo Fubinius, for example. He was a self-taught archaeologist, and I don't know what an ethnologist is supposed to do, but yeah, he was a self-taught archaeologist and ethnologist. He's a German guy. He was one of the archaeologists that worked on and covering the arts in Ife. Okay. So we'll talk about this very soon, of course. But then you find that this guy made certain outlandish statements, even after uncovering with his own hands these art forms. Imagine a person, there is this quote that's attributed to him, of him saying that these art objects, right? I don't know if I could do a fake German accent here.
You can try.
Let's see. They are eloquent of its symmetry, vitality, and delicacy of form. Directly oh, come on. I don't even know if I sound German or French.
You do.
Anyways, what he was saying, he said they are, regarding the items, of course, that he uncovered, he said they are of a symmetry, they are eloquent of a symmetry, vitality, and delicacy of form, directly reminiscent of ancient Greece. This was him acknowledging that this stuff is actually pretty wholesome, right?
Yes.
Reminds him of the art he's seen that came from ancient Greece, right? And then he went further and then spoiled everything he just said in his next statement in the same breath actually. And he said, I continue now, and prove that once upon a time a race far superior to the Negro had settled here.
Come on.
I mean, you saw that. Actually, this is some of the least racist statements
going to encounter
attributed to this guy in reference to the Ife art. The other one, right? The other one that I found in working on this episode was so offensive that I could not include it here.
Are you kidding me?
I'm telling you. But I'll be putting a link of Professor Wole Soyinka's Nobel Prize acceptance speech. It was more of a lecture because it was very lengthy. So I'll be putting a link to that in the description of this episode. Right? Please, you can click on it and read the speech. Towards the end of the speech, he addressed this guy specifically with that other quote. It was particularly offensive. This guy went so far out of his way to describe the people, right? The natives, the chieftains of Ife at the time. We'll talk about when he made the discovery. Of course, this was early in the 20th century, and particularly he worked on the excavation in 1910. Right? So he went out of his way to describe the chieftains of Ife as being feeble-minded. That was how bad it was.
Wow.
That was how bad it was. It was pretty bad, horrible, unoffensive. Had to take a break from the apartheid government in South Africa and the actions of the British in their camps and in the camps they created in East Africa, of course. He had to take away time from that to flog this guy specifically. The guy is particularly horrible, and it goes to show. Anyways, when you read, if you get to read the prize acceptance lecture by Soyinka, there was so much stuff that was included there. You know, where he talked about how you have these people that you might respect otherwise if you did not know these particular things about them. These philosophers and great thinkers, right? That are referred to as great thinkers, anyways. That when you discover their racist aspect, or certain statements they made, it just spoils everything. It takes away whatever little respect you might even have for them.
And no matter how try you had to compartmentalize it, compartmentalize. Right. No matter how you try to do so, it just doesn't work out, because there's still the same person. It doesn't work out because still the same person.
Exactly. You have people. You have a person now that's talking about, you know, the overall equality of all human beings. When he's talking about the subject matter of classes in society, so he wants to talk about all classes being equal. But then when he comes out to say things like blacks having inherently lesser faculty of thinking and being unable to which one of them was it now? I can't remember which one of them. It wasn't Hume, or was it Hume? I don't think it was David Hume. But anyways, one of them
said something like this.
Not just that, he's giving some of the reasons for why he believes Africans are subhuman, of course, that we have not been able to self-reflect to the point of being able to recognize a higher power.
Wow.
That we essentially we are godless people. As it's so preposterous that Soyinka did not even try to waste his time in proving it wrong, because of course anybody who has half a brain would know that is definitely false, and anybody who believed that, of course, must have had no experience with African culture or African society at all.
They're super racist, they're just super dumb. I don't know. So I think we've strayed away from
a bit, right? So excuse us, please. We can get so passionate when we discuss our country at times. Alright, so now we will be going in and we'll be having a look at some of these cultures who have had such an impact on the region that is now Nigeria, of course. Most of these cultures have successors, right, that are still present.
Yes,
so most of them are still present in some form in the country to this day. They are still present to this day in the country. Right. Now, as we go forward, please, we would like to put a disclosure here that please note that this is by no means a particularly extensive list, and it's not even particularly comprehensive enough. It's not a comprehensive enough examination of these cultures that we're going to be discussing. It's just some of the most striking and well-known aspects of them.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So the first, of course, is the Nok culture finds. So, the Nok people, they are given the name Nok after the name of the village or the town in Kaduna State where the artifacts were found early in the 20th century. So the Nok people are some of the, not just some, the longest existing society in the area that is Nigeria today.
The Nok.
Yeah, of course they are no longer in existence.
Yes.
At least not in the original form, and we'll get to look into them just now. All right. So sometime in the year 1928, a man working in a tin mining operation near the village of Nok in present-day Kaduna State unearthed some terracotta figures in a tin mine. He proceeded to present the sculptures to the Museum of the Department of Mines in Jos. Now, you might be looking at this and going, oh, he unearthed the figures in a tin mine in a village in Kaduna State. How come he's presenting it to a museum in Jos? You just have to bear in mind that this is 1928 Nigeria, and
so
there was no Kaduna State or Plateau State there. It was all, the boundaries were inexistent. It was all just a northern region, right? Being 1928, right? We'll come to look at this later. What was the region called as at then, and the history of how the name came to be, of course. Anyways, about 15 years after this first discovery, another was made, accidentally this time. As a matter of fact, when I was looking into this, it was said that when this second discovery was made by, right, it was made by also a tin miner, although in a different location in Jema. The person that discovered the sculptures, the second sculptures, he didn't know what they are. He just he uncovered this earth, right, from the tin mine, and then he took it home, and then he used the head as a scarecrow in his farm.
Wow.
Although it said jokingly that he used it quite successfully. He did a good job of scaring away the head. It was so realistic. Anyways, the discovery was made in a tin mining operation, the second one, this time near Jema, also in present-day Kaduna State. And ever since there had been a number of archaeological expeditions aimed at excavating areas that are suspected to contain Nok relics, as well as there have also been studies aimed at examining the structures, their origins, and potential functions of the recovered objects. The Nok sculptures, right, included nearly life-sized human heads, right, male and female, that are elaborately sculpted and depicted with highly stylized features, including jewelries, beads and ornaments. And intricate hairstyles. Wow. A commentator on this even said that some of the hairstyles that they were depicted with are still in existence in certain cultures in Nigeria today.
Wow.
Now, the finds from the archaeological studies also included ceramics, stone tools, and objects made from wrought iron, including common domestic pottery.
I got so confused.
You can't make poetry from iron. Oh, I suppose you could. It's all poetry. Anyways, because of the extensive evidence of ironworks in the sites that the discoveries were made, using extensive surveying methods and imaging techniques, evidence was found of the presence of remnants of furnaces used in making and molding the objects, and the finding of furnace parts such as this word here, right? I have to look for how it's pronounced in the dictionary, and it's apparently it has a French root. It's pronounced toujours, right? So they also found parts such as the toujours and so other machine parts, of course, there, dating back. These iron working bits were dated back to possibly a few centuries earlier than 550 BC.
Wow.
And so because of these findings, the Nok culture is regarded as belonging to the Iron Age. Prior to this, it was believed that the Africans never developed enough, at least sub-Saharan Africa never developed enough to achieve the Iron Age. Although even with this, it still stated that we had a rather uncommon chronology, right, in terms of the development. How the ages are being, how they are classified. You have the Stone Age, you have the Bronze Age, you have the Iron Age. So there was no Bronze Age for us. Yeah, there was the Stone Age and then there was the Iron Age. As evidenced by the Nok culture, of course. Anyways, overall, the Nok culture is said to have appeared around 1500 BC and to have existed till around 500 AD, having lasted for about 2000 years.
That's just crazy.
Indeed it is. And pretty surprising, I bet. Anyways, the second culture, or the second art form, the Igbo Ukwu bronzes. Now, located in present-day Anambra State, Igbo Ukwu is the name of the Igbo town in which, in 1938, initial discovery of the items were made by a man. His name was given. This was from the Wikipedia article. It was given as Isaiah Anozie. He was digging in his compound in 1938 on that day when he made the discovery. After that, 3 different archaeological sites were excavated between 1959 and 1964 in an attempt to uncover more of these artifacts, and indeed more of them were uncovered. The artifacts consisted mostly of bronze items and include a roped pot, which is of course known as the famous Igbo Ukwu roped pot, an altar stand, a pendant representing a human head with traditional Igbo scarification marks. I saw a name was given for this as Igbo face.
Igbo face.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Do you know the Igbo people to have scarification marks?
No.
I think some of them do. I don't know if the practice is still rampant to this day.
I don't think I know any Igbo that has any scarification mark.
You don't. You haven't traveled extensively.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Heart of Igbo land. You probably couldn't have. So of course,
probably ask Mr. T that.
Yeah, we'll have to. We'll have to. All right. So it's also included items such as a particularly well decorated bronze snail shell surmounted by a spotted animal that is suspected to be a leopard, and amongst others. It was said there were over 500 copper items. Copper, bronze, and iron artifacts, as well as about 165,000 glass, chameleon, and stone beads, pottery, textiles, and ivory. The finds have been dated to between the 9th and 10th centuries AD. We're talking over 1,000 years ago.
Yes, we are.
And they constitute the first evidence of the use of copper in sub-Saharan Africa.
The first
evidence of the use of copper. The Nok culture where iron based is
copper.
Copper and copper alloys, of course, bronze and the other stuff. So, thirdly, we discussed this a bit earlier on, right?
Yes.
The art of Ile-Ife, right? So, Ile-Ife. The
sacred city of Yoruba.
Exactly. So they have been talking about how the pronunciation is because of how it's supposed to be pronounced, because of potentially how the name came to be. Some said it's originated from Ile-Ife, meaning home of love, heaven of love, something like that. I wouldn't know. I'm not an expert on these issues. Anyways, and how it's pronounced this today, of course, is Ile-Ife. So Ile-Ife is a town in Osun State, southwestern Nigeria, and is regarded as Ada just said, the sacred city of the Yoruba. Major excavation was carried out in the town in the year 1910, although there have been subsequent excavations there too, and a collection of terracotta and stone sculptures were uncovered, and including, of course, the famous Olokun bronze head. This is a sculpture of the head of what is purported to be an ancient king of the Ife kingdom, made of brass. Particularly elaborate. I mean, if you see the picture of this, you could understand why this guy could be so surprised that he could find something like this in this area that's inhabited by people he sees as inferior to himself. You probably look at it and think, wow, in 1,000 lifetimes I could never create this. So the art anyways is dated back to the 12th and 14th century. Right? And the fourth art we'll be discussing here is the court art of Benin. Benin City is today the capital of Edo State in south Nigeria, right?
Yeah.
What used to be the Midwest. South
Midwest.
Yeah, right.
Sounded better, Midwest.
Who knows? They might have to bring it back. Don't quote. Anyways, the court art of Benin is one of the most widely known Black African ancient forms. And the reason for this is of its sudden presence in large amounts in Europe after much of it was stolen by British soldiers following their sack of the kingdoms in its last days. The ancient kingdom, of course. The court art is so referred because the Oba of Benin of old retained a monopoly of the works, and the casters who made the artworks were forbidden to work outside the palace. As a result, the art was lost totally following the destruction of the kingdom in 1897.
Why?
By a British, what they refer to as the Benin Punitive Expedition of 1897. It's a very sad affair, very sordid affair, very sordid indeed. Some of these objects, all of the objects we discussed above belonging to all of these cultures, right? They can today be found in various museums in Nigeria. However, many of them have been looted and relocated and can be found in museums and private collections in the Western world.
Most of them.
A particular example of this is we spoke about the
artifacts.
The Benin artworks, right, that were stolen and looted following the destruction of the kingdom by the British, of course. But you see, the not artifacts are a particular example of this, of the looting. They were looted directly from the source in the ground, because after the first few discoveries were made, right, the government was too slow, right, in declaring this place as a heritage site, right, and so they were not protected. So people, private citizens of course, took advantage and they went in and they started doing their own private excavations without training, and they just started uncovering and looting many of these artifacts and then selling it for profit, right? And of course they were not experts, so they didn't know the proper way to document their findings. You know, when you uncover something like that, you have to document in which state was it found, as in what's the nature of the environment that you found it in. You have to document the location. You have to document what it is, what you think it is, and stuff like that. You have to do some preliminary studies on it, of course, too. But then, of course, none of this was done. Since all they did was just uncover it and then sell it for profit. So the object, anyways, we are so looted so thoroughly that in 2005, a joint research project between the National Commission for Museums and Monuments concluded there was a joint research between them and a German university, I think called the Goethe University or something like that. I can't pronounce the German names. So the research concluded that more than 90% of Nok culture sites that is known in the research, right, that you are going to study, have been looted illegally. And in 2013, a collaboration between the French and Nigerian governments resulted in the return of 5 Nok statues that were looted by a French thief back in 2010. Earlier this year, of course, this year being 2020, right?
Yeah. 2021.
Yeah, I came across a
2021.
Right, so earlier this year, 2021, please forgive me. I came across a mini podcast series by ABC Podcast. It was titled Stuff the British Stole. Right? The first episode, I think, was about a couple of particular arts that were looted from certain regions in India. The second episode, however, was about the looted Benin court arts.
Oh.
And they did some background storytelling on it, on how the punitive expedition, of course, of 1897, and talked about how the stuff came to arrive at the UK all the way from the Benin Kingdom, and they focused
the one at the British Museum, that's like, I think we asked for it, but which is not saying much.
This stuff is so much, of course, and of course, the truth is that
it's filled with art, everything, of course, most of them.
For one thing, it's of value to them presently, and right, which isn't. I mean, of course, it's valuable. Of course, it's valuable.
It's going to be valuable to us.
Yeah, definitely, definitely, it's of value to them. Of course, I mean, it doesn't make sense because they stole it.
Yes, basically.
And I think the main thing was just that we apparently just don't have that vibrant enough tourism sector to want to really actively drive for this stuff. Because if you listen to this episode,
I think some some English, some of them want to give it to us.
Exactly.
Back.
You see, that's what's happened in the episode of the podcast that I'm just talking about, the ABC podcast. They focused on two British men that were trying to return an artifact belonging to the relative of one of them. That was an elder relative. He died way back, of course. So he was a soldier, one of the mercenaries, the soldiers that participated in the destruction of the Benin Kingdom back in the day, of course. And they went in detail on how they tried to return it and the things they encountered when they tried to, of course. And you get to discover how really unserious the government can be when dealing with these issues, particularly insensitive. The government was trying to gain political capital unnecessarily with this stuff that they should have be rather agile in concluding.
Yes.
Right. So it was just a particular sorry affair.
If I'm not mistaken, they returned a few.
Yeah, of course.
They returned a few to us. Pushing for it, but I don't see Nigeria.
I think there was the issue, of course. This was it last year or was it this year? About return of some certain artifacts too. I think, was it from France or Britain? It was also in the news earlier this year. Yeah, it was in the news earlier this year actually. All right. So thank you if you've stuck with us so far, and we still have a little ways to go. We hope it has been quite enlightening. Anyways, so Ada, how are you finding this so far?
Finding it enlightening.
Right?
Getting to understand.
Okay.
Quite a number of things.
I only wish that there is a way I could include, because in working on this, I collected quite a number of images and pictures of many of these arts and artifacts, and there are just many pictures from over the ages.
I didn't include
of interest. Yeah, I don't know if there could be a way to include to show our listeners the pictures of these things.
Probably be on the site.
I think what we'll do, it will be on the Facebook
links.
page. It will be on the Facebook page, and I can't promise for the YouTube upload. I can't promise that.
That would be hard to do now.
Not particularly. I don't know if we could do it in time. Right, but I'll see if that could be possible. But then, anyways, we go ahead. Right, so our next outlook here will be a look at the development and evolution of Nigerian society through the ages, leading to the 19th century. Here, the Nok culture that we discussed above, right?
Dated 1500
BC, right? It represents the earliest coherent culture known to have inhabited the region of modern Nigeria. Studies of the Nok finds show the rise of a late Stone Age culture into iron workers and their subsequent spread westward and southward. On the basis of art styles, a link can be drawn between the Nok terracotta and the Igbo bronze to the Ife and bronzes and in cut art of the 15th to 18th century.
So like you said, it's like a leap of bronze part, just from stone to iron.
According to studies, right, since they couldn't find any evidence of the ages there. Anyways, this segment that I just went through now, I was quoting Professor Ade Ajayi from the collection, the work Atlas of Nigeria. He went on to give some commentary on the influence of the North culture, right, on the cultures and societies in Nigeria present day. He went ahead to not just what he did here, where he was drawing similarities between the different art forms. He went ahead to draw similarities between their myths of origin. Right now, I couldn't include that here because I can't say I disagree with him. Who am I to do that? What do I know? But I couldn't corroborate
with evidence
the stories, not just with evidence. I couldn't with either explanations elsewhere or second opinions and stuff like that. So I couldn't include that here. I'm not expert on this issue, so please. Now, the principal sources of Nigerian history, as is true for much of sub-Saharan Africa, are bodies of oral tradition, mindfully preserved and transmitted as a form of education. Right? The oral traditions are, as a matter of convention, more abundant and better preserved in centralized monarchical states than they are in non-centralized communities. I think this makes sense because now, if you have a centralized community, right, a centralized state, it's easy for the people there, since they exist as one large body, to agree upon a single origin story, that they collectively agree upon, they believe in, they work on over time, and that they transmit over the ages. As opposed to if you have a non-centralized community where you have different sectors of the community, of course, and the different sector might tend to stick with different aspects of the same story and might tend to evolve it, change it over time, and over time it tends to break up because you don't know which of them to take, of course. However, in a number of the Islamic states, some of the traditions were recorded in written form. Examples include the Kano Chronicles of the 14th to 16th century and the Chronicles of Idris Aloma of Borno in the 16th century. According to the Kano Chronicles, the Hausa people came under the influence of the Mali Empire in the 14th century. Study of conversions in the Yoruba language suggests that Islam was introduced into the Oyo Kingdom around the same period. The period between the 15th and 16th century saw the rise of the Songhai Empire just north of the Hausa lands, bringing greater sophistication, centers of learning, and prosperous trade, with the Hausa marketing not only produced goods and imports from the Mediterranean, but also of the forest zones, including iron, ivory, kola nuts, and spices. So what we are seeing here is the development and evolution of the Hausa state is today the northern part of the country, of course. How they came to be influenced by the early in the 14th century. By the way, we'll be looking at the origins of many of the most prominent cities in the country. That will be in time, of course, not present, but this just brought that back to mind presently, and that's why I sidetracked to that. So anyways, this is telling us of how they came to get under the influence then, and then afterwards in the 15th to 16th century with the rise of the Songhai Empire, which influenced the Hausa kingdoms and brought some of the goodness of trade and learning to them then. At the beginning of the 15th century, going down to the coastal areas now, right, in what is now southern Nigeria. At the beginning of the 15th century, only the northern parts of the coast of Africa was known to Europe. However, due to the need to discover an alternate route to India, Portuguese sailors sailed down the western coastline of the continent and round the Cape of Good Hope, that's down in South Africa, and thus finding a southeast passage to India, with the result that by the end of the 15th century, the continent's great outline was known, particularly to Portuguese sailors. There was the fact that Vasco da Gama, the famous Portuguese explorer, sailed past the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa in the year 1497. That's just right at the end of the 15th century, of course. The Portuguese were known to have established trading relations with inhabitants of the coastal regions of Africa. We'll talk about the nature of these trades later on. Now, the predominant story was that the Europeans in the 16th century, this was when they first made landing in the coastal areas of southern Nigeria, of course. The Europeans in the 16th century found a flourishing Benin kingdom still expanding. The Portuguese, right, they testified to the effective role of Benin monarch, the Oba of Benin. They described the peace and stability in his dominion, the flourishing agriculture, trade and culture that was developed for the present time. Many of the kingdoms in the region enjoyed autonomous growth during the early 16th century, although this was to only last until the incoming of European traders, particularly the Portuguese at first now, the rapid decline and deterioration that we will see soon afterwards. However, while it lasted, there was rapid growth in the Korarafa kingdom. The Korarafa, at the height of their power, occupied a region spanning modern-day Taraba, Adamawa, Gombe, Bauchi, and Plateau states. Around the same time, Borno, the kingdom, also achieved great development under Idris Aloma. He expanded and consolidated his power and worked to improve irrigation and agriculture, markets, and external trade with trans-Saharan caravans. We were doing irrigation in the 16th century. Yeah, and we still complain about the government not putting in enough efforts towards that this year. But then, that's by the way. Early in the 17th century, the Songhai Empire was defeated by Moroccan troops. The troops were ruthless in victory. What happened was they were more powerful, they had better guns, right? But they didn't have the manpower or the resources to sustain the kingdom. So yes, they had to fight the kingdom. So what they did was they fought the kingdom, and instead of keeping it and letting it be to fester or to rise again after they completely destroyed it. They destroyed it completely, destroyed their centers of learning, and they kidnapped, if you will, they took their eminent scholars back home with them to Morocco, and this led to the decline of the trans-Saharan trade. And in the outlying parts of the empire, such as in the Hausa land, to a disruption of good government. Down south, in this period of time, around the coastal side of things, of course, the European traders spoken of before had arrived. On arrival, they came with missionaries and proposed exchange of ambassadors. As a matter of fact, right, it was said that at the time the Benin was destroyed, right, at the end of the 19th century, the kingdom is there were certain inhabitants of the kingdom who spoke pidgin Portuguese. Right, so these are people that they have had sustained contact with the Portuguese yes, over all these centuries, beginning from the 16th century here. At first, the trade was in items such as ivory, textiles, peppers, and other spices. However, slaves were soon added to the list, of course, as the demand for slaves grew rapidly in Europe and in other colonies, of course, including America and
famous transatlantic ships.
Exactly. This is around the beginning of where it started. So by the time the demand grew so rapidly, they lost interest in missionary work and diplomatic exchange and focused entirely on the lucrative transatlantic slave trade. So following the disputes, however, the Benin monarch expelled the Portuguese from his kingdom, but the Portuguese only relocated their base to the outlying parts of the kingdom and proceeded to arm the tribes there. They traded with them and armed them, and they set them off against the Benin. They put stories in their head about fighting for their independence and stuff. And they set them off to fight against the Benin. So
just to continue.
Later on, we'll talk. Of course, this is only a minor part of how the slave trade, of course, caused the disintegration of the great kingdoms and the empires by the so doing of the Portuguese, the Oba of Benin found, as so many other African rulers had done, that however much they disliked the trade in human beings, the slave trade that is, they had to just adjust to live with it in the face of competition from their rivals, right? And whoever get to be their allies, of course, against their neighbors, against them. So it follows from this that, as we are soon to see, that some of the worst effects of the slave trade was in the disruption of the process of state formation because of its encouragement of the rise of warlords, what is called warlordism, which made it particularly difficult to maintain centralized authority and to manage the place or the land efficiently, the kingdom, the domain. Now, slave trade, though it started as a subsidiary to agricultural products, gradually grew so much that it incorporated the entire region into the global economy of the time in a state of total dependence. And as a result of that, other areas of the local economy, such as the agriculture and industrial production activities, received progressively lesser attention. So the local rulers struggled instead to amass their own slaves because of this and ammunition, leading to increased infighting within most of the prominent kingdoms at the time.
Internal strife.
You have the Yoruba states becoming embroiled in a series of unending wars and scuffles, and the decline in the authority of the. Now, I never learned how to pronounce this, right? I always just add it as Mai of Borno. I don't know if it's Mai or May of Borno.
I think it's May.
It's May, right?
May.
Okay, so the May of Borno. I'm sorry, May of Borno, if I'm killing that title. Anyways, so this decline in the authority of the May led to the end of the Sefawa dynasty that had ruled Borno for over 1,000 years.
Wow.
When we talked earlier on about disruption to an evolutionary process that has been on for such a long time, this is what we talked about. These people have been ruling for about 1,000 years, and then due to this cascade of events, it ended over less than a century. This was also part of the cause of the friction in Hausa land that generated the reform agenda of Usman Dan Fodio. Right. So, beginning in the year 1804, Dan Fodio fought a series of battles against a local ruler. That's how he began anyways. He was fighting against a local ruler known as Sultan Yunfa of Gober. The local ruler was actually said to be a former student of his, who then became the ruler. And when he became the ruler, he banished his former teacher. Right. So when he did banish the former teacher, of course, had support from his students, and they flocked to him, right? With the result that, of course, once he began to amass power, the Sultan Yunfa became jealous and frightened, of course, and declared war against him. So, of course, the Danfodio fought a war between them, and then so the war started in the year 1804. The war, however, ended in 1809 when Danfodio's forces finally defeated Yunfa of Gober, and this also by the year 1809 they had also captured a number of Hausa states, including Katsina, Daura, Kano, and lastly Gober, of course. And the same year, 1809, Muhammad Bello, son of Danfodio, founded the city of Sokoto. So there's a bunch of stuff that went on afterwards about how the expansion of the Sokoto into the Caliphate, and how when Danfodio was retiring from administrative duties a number of years, I think in 1817, if I remember correctly, he split the domain in two between his brother Abdullah Danfodio and his son Muhammad Bello, and what happened subsequently afterwards, it has an entire history of its own, right? However, the Fulani conquest of Hausa land, that's where we are at this period, early in the 19th century. Wow, how long we've come. We've come so far, man. from 1500 BC.
From 1500 BC.
Wow. So the Fulani
100
conquest of
years.
Hausaland, however, continued to generate wars and flow of slaves. That's what's prominent in this time, of course. About the wars that were going on elsewhere, in Borno, in the southwest, in the southeast, and in Edo, of course. The choreographer monarchical states, right, in what is now this lower part, southern part of the northeast. The states collapsed, just as did the old Oyo Empire at this point in time. The Oyo Empire actually was said to have, it was said to have been sacked by, the forces of the Usman Danfodio, or this was later after him actually. Right. So the old Oyo capital was destroyed and evacuated, and this sent a large group of refugees southwards, and hence causing a cascade of effects that led to the endemic wars, which did not end until the British exploited them to establish colonial rule on Yoruba land in between 1890 and 1897. This here we just spoke about here by the surface was actually a complicated bunch of affairs between and among the Yoruba states. You have what happened between the Ibadan and the Egba people of Abeokuta, and then you have the Ijebu people fighting against. So many of the states they were fighting against each other, right? And this was at the in the time from the beginning of the 18th century to the later part. The beginning of the 19th century, to the later part of the 19th, and of course, as all that was happening, in the 1851, the British came in and they interfered in a succession dispute in Lagos, with the result that 10 years later, in 1861, they annexed Lagos as part of the British colony, and so began the colonization of Nigeria. However, that is a discussion for the part 2 of this episode, coming out on Tuesday. Part 2 actually. That will be the next part, next episode. In the second part, there we'll be talking about how the British came involved in why did they come in, where is Lagos, what did they have to gain, and looking at all that, of course, what they did afterwards. And we'll be ending with the creation of what is now known as modern day Nigeria, of course. In the third part of this series of episodes, we will be looking at the legacy and the effects of colonization. This part here is the ancient history of Nigeria. The next part will be the history of colonization of Nigeria, right? And then the last part will be the legacy and effects. Right, so Ada, how have you been?
I've been fine, enjoyed it. It was pretty lengthy, but enlightening.
Right?
So, yeah.
I hope so. A lot, too much of I've gone into this for this not to be enlightening, right? So, dear listener, I hope at this point you haven't gotten too bored and that you've been pretty entertained with as we try to give you fact after fact after fact, back to back. So we thank you for staying with us for this long, and catch us on the next one.
Yes, do catch us.
All right.
Ada out. People have been laughing about this Ada out thing, but
please sign out again. Ada out, and the scientists turning out to catch you on the next one. Yes. See ya.
See you guys.